Hello, Chris here. I just finished. I got my last video was cut off. I tried starting it up after I paused the screencast and it shut the video. So I just wanted to continue off a few ideas. In the last video, I talked about adups.foto backdoor that was placed in phones like adups.foto backdoor that was placed in phones ZTE and Huawei, I think you pronounce it, Chinese manufactured phones that are sold in the United States and in the West and China. This phone that I have, I showed you that it does have that backdoor in it, that it can't be removed. I also have considered putting on a different ROM, but because of the CPU, I don't know if I can put on a different ROM because of the manufacturer. I might not be able to. So basically, you're kind of stuck with a device that is basically a spy device, and anybody who knows how to utilize that backdoor can get in. So on this phone, this ZTE, it was sold in Woolworths. It's a food chain store here in Australia, and it was really cheap. It was about 40 bucks or something like that. So basically, it's sold to poor people and people who can't afford a really expensive phone or a burner phone. And I think that's what it's targeting mostly, is just burner phones. And I think that they're trying to create or purposely put this backdoor in these phones so that people who use burner phones, just throwaway phones, they can be easily monitored. And here we go back to the ridiculous. I think they use national security as a way to justify this behavior. I think it's unethical. I don't think uh, it should be allowed. This phone here has been monitored positive because of the way it runs and because of the odd changes and reconfigurations that I've been noticing since I got the phone. Um, I think that, like I said, I've talked about it in many other videos. This environment that I live in, this building is majority owned by the Anglican Church and the Anglican students, Presbyterian students, and um, Baptist students. All three of them denominations are kind of affiliated with the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church doesn't mind associating with Presbyterians and Baptists. These people go to this M-O-O-R-E, the Theological Bible College, and since we moved here into this building, we've had our computers hacked, we've had our house broken into, and I think, and evidence suggests that the Anglicans are responsible for a lot of it, and they have their hand in it. It's almost like they're training to be like national, like to work for like ASIO, as ASIO, the Australian equivalent of NSA. It's almost like the Australian government, and this is going to sound crazy, but I think there's lots of evidence suggesting it. The Anglican Church is an offshoot, as in the Australian equivalent of the Church of England, and in England, the Church of England is higher than the Parliament. If you look at the hierarchy of the framework of the political system in England, it's higher than the Parliament. So you've got the state and the church are like one. There's a church-state relationship, and here in Australia, I think, and evidently I've seen it for 3 years now, the Anglican Church and the Australian government, it's like a church-state relationship. The former Premier of New South Wales was Premier Mike Baird. Premier Mike Baird went to a church, and one of the students here that evidence suggests was involved in the attacks on our phone and on our computers, he was a student minister at the same church that Premier Mike Baird went to, and I'm certain that they conversed and talked about issues that were happening here in uh, this building. Essentially, I'll be blunt. I think that this building was treated like a controlled environment, like a laboratory environment, like a controlled situation, similar to a lab, but slightly more real world. It's almost like the real world. It's almost like in Wild, but not quite, because they control it. They own almost all the units, and everybody's afraid of them. Nobody's going to say anything. They basically run the cops around here. The Anglican Church basically runs the cops. Uh, they do background checks on everybody that they're going to target. So I mean, they wouldn't have targeted me if I was anybody, if I was rich or knew somebody or knew lawyers or knew a whole bunch about computer science and could easily catch them. They wouldn't have targeted me because that would jeopardize them being caught. So I think that they use this environment as an environment to learn and to push the boundaries on how far they can go and what they can get away with. Then they take what they learn here and they talk to their friends in parliament and politics, and they establish legislation that allows them to get away with what they're getting away with. For example, shortly after we moved here, I heard in the ABC an article for that the government was talking about um, defining what a computer was, what a network was, and what a cell phone was. And by defining these devices, they would be able to create laws that allowed them to enter these devices without getting caught, without being legal. So they can define the device, and then they can define the behavior that allows them to access the devices. Now, I think that there's a relationship between the Australian government and the Anglican Church, and I think that the Anglican Church uh, actively engages in members of the Anglican Church actively engage in device exploitation, computers, phones, and networks. And I think that the students that came here were like training in these techniques. I also think that the people that knew people knew that this device had this backdoor and they knew how to exploit it. I think that they knew when Woolworths was selling this device to the public. I think they knew that this device had this backdoor and they intentionally sold it out to the public. Within 12 hours, they were exploiting this. I think they were exploiting this device. My device disk space was had weird changes to it, weird losses of data, weird gainings in data. One time I gained 5 megabytes of data out of nowhere. Another time I gained almost 400 megabytes of data out of nowhere, just appeared and then disappeared and then appeared, and stuff like that happens all the time. Strange, you know, activity within the system. For example, here, how much space do I have? Okay, I'll just, here is settings. Here is, let's look at apps. Let's go to contacts. I have contacts disabled, and